It begins with something deceptively simple. You finish your day, glance at the clock, and decide not to eat dinner. No dramatic fasting challenge, no social media trend, just one quiet omission. But biologically, this is not a small act. The human body is structured around expectation. It anticipates inputs. It predicts energy delivery. And when a familiar meal does not arrive, the system does not collapse. It recalibrates. Within hours of skipping dinner, insulin levels begin to fall. This is the first critical shift. Insulin is not merely a blood sugar hormone. It is a metabolic traffic director. When insulin is elevated, the body prioritizes storage. When insulin drops, the body begins unlocking access to stored fuel. That single missed meal signals the transition from external energy dependence to internal energy utilization. In metabolic terms, you have initiated the earliest phase of fuel switching. During the first 4-6 hours after your usual dinner time, your body continues to operate on circulating glucose. Glycogen-stored carbohydrate in the liver acts as a buffer, maintaining stable blood sugar. This glycogen reserve typically lasts between 12 and 24 hours depending on activity level, muscle mass, and prior carbohydrate intake. As insulin declines, glucagon rises, instructing the liver to release glucose into the bloodstream. The body is not panicking. It is executing a well-programmed survival protocol refined over millennia. Psychologically, however, the experience may feel more intense than the biology suggests. Much of what we call hunger is rhythmic conditioning. Ghrelin, the hunger hormone, rises at habitual mealtimes regardless of actual energy need. Studies show that ghrelin secretion follows learned patterns. When dinner is skipped, ghrelin may spike temporarily, but it also falls if no food arrives. Hunger comes in waves. It is not linear. Understanding this distinction is powerful. It reframes the experience from emergency to adaptation. By late evening, the metabolic shift deepens. As liver glycogen begins to decline, lipolysis, the breakdown of stored fat, gradually increases. Fat cells release fatty acids into circulation. These fatty acids become the primary fuel source for muscle tissue and eventually contribute to ketone production in the liver. This transition is the foundation of metabolic flexibility, the body's ability to efficiently alternate between carbohydrate and fat as fuel sources. Modern eating patterns often blunt this flexibility by keeping insulin chronically elevated. Skipping dinner reopens that pathway. Around midnight, growth hormone secretion increases. This is not coincidental. Growth hormone rises during both sleep and fasting states. Its function during fasting is protective. It preserves lean muscle mass while encouraging fat utilization. Contrary to the common fear that missing meals automatically burns muscle, short-term fasting activates hormonal mechanisms that help safeguard it. Evolution favored survival systems that maintained structural tissue while energy intake fluctuated. Sleep that first night may feel different. Without late evening digestion, core body temperature can decline more naturally. Insulin remains lower. Melatonin release may occur with fewer disruptions. Some individuals report improved sleep onset, while others initially experience restlessness due to adaptation. Both responses are physiologically explainable. The nervous system is recalibrating to a new input pattern. By the next morning, approximately 12-14 hours since your last meal, glycogen stores are significantly reduced. Fat oxidation increases measurably. The liver begins producing small but meaningful amounts of ketone bodies, beta-hydroxybutyrate, and acetoacetate. These molecules are not emergency fuels, they are alternative fuels. The brain, which cannot directly use fatty acids, readily adapts to ketones. Within hours, neurons begin integrating ketones into their energy supply. This metabolic state is often misunderstood. It is not starvation. Starvation implies prolonged nutrient deprivation beyond adaptive capacity. What is occurring here is structured, short-term energy cycling. Human physiology evolved in environments without constant food access. The capacity to transition between fed and fasted states is not a hack, it is baseline biology. By day 2 of skipping dinner, the hormonal pattern stabilizes. Insulin remains lower for longer periods. Glucagon activity is sustained. Lipolysis becomes more efficient. The enzymatic machinery responsible for fat metabolism, hormone-sensitive lipase, and carnitine transport systems ramps up activity. The body is not just accessing fat. It is improving its ability to access fat. This distinction matters. Inflammatory markers may begin to decline. While dramatic changes require longer periods, even short fasting windows are associated with reductions in circulating insulin and improvements in insulin sensitivity. Lower insulin exposure reduces oxidative stress on vascular tissue. The pancreas, temporarily relieved from repeated insulin surges, experiences functional rest. This concept, metabolic rest, is rarely discussed but biologically significant. Meanwhile, something subtle unfolds in the brain. As ketone availability increases, mitochondrial efficiency improves. Ketones generate ATP with fewer reactive oxygen species compared to glucose metabolism under high insulin conditions. This can translate subjectively into clearer thinking or steadier energy. Research also suggests that fasting states stimulate production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, a protein associated with neuronal resilience and plasticity. Importantly, none of this requires extreme caloric restriction. You are not eliminating nutrition. You are compressing the feeding window. This distinction is central. Skipping dinner while maintaining adequate protein, micronutrients, and total caloric sufficiency earlier in the day differs fundamentally from chronic undereating. The goal is metabolic rhythm, not deprivation. By the end of the second day, the body has largely accepted the new pattern. Ghrelin peaks diminish, evening hunger often becomes quieter, energy stabilizes. The system is transitioning from reactive metabolism driven by constant food input to proactive metabolism driven by internal regulation. What appears externally as a minor habit change is internally a coordinated endocrine recalibration. Insulin, glucagon, growth hormone, cortisol, leptin, and ghrelin are all adjusting to a narrower feeding window. The body is not weakening, it is remembering. And this is where the deeper question emerges. What happens when this pattern continues not for 1 or 2 nights, but for 2 full weeks? What changes move beyond hormones into cellular repair? When does fat burning become adaptation rather than response? And at what point does the body begin restructuring itself around this rhythm? To answer that, we need to move beyond fuel switching and into cellular maintenance. Because skipping dinner is not just about weight, it is about signaling. And signals are what shape long-term biology. By day 3 of consistently skipping dinner, the metabolic transition is no longer tentative. It is established. Glycogen is no longer the primary evening fuel source. Fat oxidation has increased substantially. Ketone production is measurable, not incidental. What began as a hormonal adjustment is now becoming a cellular shift. At this stage, the body is operating in what researchers describe as a low insulin metabolic window. This matters because insulin is not only a storage hormone, it is also a growth signal. When insulin remains chronically elevated, certain cellular repair pathways are suppressed. When insulin drops for sustained periods, those pathways begin to reemerge. One of the most studied among them is autophagy. Autophagy, from the Greek meaning self-eating, is not destruction, it is maintenance. Cells dismantle damaged proteins, dysfunctional mitochondria, and misfolded structures, then recycle the components to build new functional ones. This process was once invisible to science until it was clarified through groundbreaking research that later earned the 2016 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. While prolonged fasting accelerates autophagy more dramatically, even repeated short fasting windows contribute to incremental activation over time. The body uses absence as a signal to repair. By the 4th day of skipping dinner, something subtle changes in subjective experience. Hunger waves diminish in intensity. Evening cravings often feel less urgent. This is not willpower strengthening. It is hormonal stabilization. Ghrelin peaks adapt to the new routine. Leptin sensitivity may begin improving as insulin exposure decreases. The appetite regulation network is recalibrating. Simultaneously, insulin sensitivity improves at the cellular level. Muscle cells begin responding more efficiently to smaller amounts of insulin. Glucose transporters, particularly GLUT4 and skeletal muscle, function more effectively. The result is not just better blood sugar control, but smoother energy distribution. Instead of dramatic spikes and crashes, glucose dynamics flatten into more stable curves. For individuals in early stages of metabolic dysfunction, this shift can be significant. Inflammation markers may also trend downward. Chronically elevated insulin and constant feeding cycles are associated with increased oxidative stress. When feeding frequency narrows, oxidative load decreases. C-reactive protein, CRP, and other inflammatory indicators do not disappear overnight, but early modulation begins. Reduced inflammation translates into less endothelial stress in blood vessels, improved vascular flexibility, and potentially better long-term cardiovascular resilience. Meanwhile, mitochondria, the energy-producing organelles within cells, respond to the new metabolic demand. Repeated transitions between fed and fasted states stimulate mitochondrial biogenesis, the process by which cells produce new mitochondria. More mitochondria mean improved metabolic capacity. Energy production becomes more efficient. Fatigue resistance increases. From a longevity perspective, mitochondrial health is central. Aging at the cellular level is closely tied to mitochondrial decline. Encouraging mitochondrial renewal is not cosmetic, it is structural. By day 5, digestive physiology reflects the change. In modern eating patterns, the digestive tract rarely rests. Late-night meals extend digestive activity into hours when the body is evolutionarily programmed for recovery. Removing dinner shortens that digestive window. The pancreas secretes less insulin overall. The liver processes fewer nighttime nutrients. The gastrointestinal tract enters longer repair phases. The gut microbiome also responds. Bacterial populations fluctuate in relation to feeding timing. Extended fasting intervals promote diversity shifts that may favor beneficial species. Short-chain fatty acid production, particularly butyrate, can improve gut barrier integrity. Since approximately 70% of immune cells reside in the gut-associated lymphoid tissue, improved gut environment has systemic implications. Immune regulation and inflammation are tightly connected to microbial balance. Sleep architecture often improves during this phase. Without late digestion elevating core body temperature and activating sympathetic tone, melatonin secretion aligns more cleanly with circadian rhythm. Cortisol patterns stabilize. Deep sleep stages may lengthen. During these stages, the glymphatic system, a clearance mechanism in the brain, operates more effectively, removing metabolic waste products that accumulate during waking hours. Cognitive clarity the following morning is not mystical. It is neurophysiology. By the end of the first week, metabolic adaptation is evident. The body has transitioned from reactive to rhythmic energy management. Fat has become a primary nighttime fuel source. Insulin remains lower for longer stretches. Hormonal oscillations are smoother. Hunger is contextual rather than compulsive. Importantly, this adaptation does not equate to universal suitability. Individuals with certain medical conditions, thyroid disorders, pregnancy, or history of disordered eating require medical guidance. The purpose here is not prescription. It is explanation. Biological mechanisms operate universally. Implementation must remain individualized. Around day 7, many individuals report a distinct clarity. This likely reflects combined effects of stable glucose, increased ketone availability, reduced inflammation, and improved sleep. Ketones, particularly beta-hydroxybutyrate, act not only as fuel but also as signaling molecules. They influence gene expression related to oxidative stress resistance and metabolic regulation. This signaling role may contribute to the sense of steadier mental energy. Another critical shift occurs in fat metabolism efficiency. Hormone-sensitive lipase activity increases. Carnitine transport systems facilitate fatty acid entry into mitochondria more effectively. The body is no longer reluctantly accessing fat stores, it is proficient at doing so. This proficiency reduces energy volatility. Yet there is an important distinction to reinforce. Skipping dinner does not eliminate the need for adequate nutrition. Total protein intake must remain sufficient to preserve lean mass. Electrolytes, particularly sodium, potassium, and magnesium, require attention, as lower insulin increases renal sodium excretion. Hydration strategies become relevant. Metabolic rhythm works best when structural inputs remain adequate. By the close of week 1, the system reflects coherence. Insulin, glucagon, growth hormone, leptin, ghrelin, cortisol, all have recalibrated around a narrower feeding window. This is not a stress state in healthy individuals. It is a return to oscillation. Oscillation is the design principle of human biology. Fed and fasted, activity and rest, light and darkness. And this is where the transformation deepens. The first week establishes metabolic flexibility. The second week begins testing durability. Do these improvements stabilize? Does cellular repair intensify? How does the brain adapt to sustained ketone exposure? And what risks emerge if balance is ignored? To understand the full 4-day arc, we now move beyond adaptation into consolidation. As the second week begins, the physiology shifts from adaptation to consolidation. The first 7 days were about teaching the body a new rhythm. Days 8 through 14 test whether that rhythm becomes efficient, sustainable, and internally coordinated. By day 8, insulin levels are not just lower, they are predictably lower. This predictability is critical. The endocrine system thrives on rhythm. When feeding windows narrow consistently, insulin secretion patterns smooth out. Fewer spikes mean fewer reactive corrections. Cells that were previously resistant to insulin signaling begin restoring sensitivity. This is not dramatic in appearance, but metabolically it is foundational. Improved insulin sensitivity reduces the burden on the pancreas and stabilizes energy regulation long-term. Fat oxidation by this stage is no longer compensatory, it is primary during fasting hours. Hormone-sensitive lipase activity is upregulated. Carnitine transport mechanisms in mitochondria operate more efficiently, allowing fatty acids to enter and be oxidized with less metabolic friction. The body has transitioned from reluctantly accessing stored energy to fluently using it. This fluency reduces internal metabolic stress. Ketone production during the evening and overnight period becomes more pronounced. Beta-hydroxybutyrate levels rise modestly but consistently. What matters here is not extreme ketosis, but metabolic flexibility. The brain now integrates ketones smoothly alongside glucose. For many individuals, this corresponds with a steady cognitive tone. Energy feels cleaner because it is less dependent on rapid glucose fluctuations. At the molecular level, repeated fasting windows continue reinforcing autophagic signaling. While full autophagy acceleration typically requires longer fasting durations, consistent time-restricted feeding contributes to incremental cellular housekeeping. Damaged mitochondria are selectively cleared, protein aggregates are recycled. These processes support long-term cellular resilience. Aging, in many respects, reflects accumulated cellular debris. Any intervention that improves intracellular maintenance has structural implications beyond weight loss. Around day 9 or 10, changes in inflammatory tone become more noticeable for some individuals. Reduced feeding frequency can decrease systemic inflammatory signaling, particularly in those previously consuming late-night high glycemic meals. Lower insulin exposure and improved mitochondrial efficiency reduce reactive oxygen species production. This contributes to less vascular strain and potentially improved endothelial function. The cardiovascular system benefits from metabolic calm. The gut continues adapting as well. Microbial populations respond to timing cues. Extended nightly fasting promotes cyclical microbial diversity rather than constant substrate exposure. This oscillation may strengthen gut barrier integrity and improve short-chain fatty acid production. Since the gut-brain axis is bidirectional, these microbial adjustments influence neurotransmitter balance. Serotonin production, largely originating in the gut, may stabilize alongside microbial shifts. This partly explains why mood changes during structured fasting are often described as clarity rather than agitation once adaptation occurs. However, the second week is also where balance must be emphasized. Prolonged or repeated fasting without adequate daytime nutrition can begin affecting thyroid function. Specifically, levels of triiodiradenine, T3, may decrease if caloric intake becomes chronically insufficient. A modest, temporary reduction in T3 can represent metabolic efficiency, but sustained suppression reflects energy deficiency. The distinction lies in total nutrient adequacy. Skipping dinner while maintaining appropriate protein, micronutrients, and caloric sufficiency earlier in the day differs biologically from undereating. Electrolyte balance also becomes relevant. Lower insulin levels increase renal sodium excretion. With less sodium retention, mild dizziness or fatigue may occur if hydration is neglected. This is not a sign of metabolic failure. It is a predictable physiological adjustment. Adequate fluid intake and attention to sodium, potassium, and magnesium help maintain equilibrium. Precision sustains adaptation. By day 11, cognitive patterns often reflect cumulative metabolic stability. Ketones influence gene expression related to oxidative stress resistance and neuronal survival. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor (BDNF) expression may increase in fasting states, supporting synaptic plasticity. This does not imply immediate cognitive transformation, but it suggests structural support for long-term neural resilience. Sleep architecture frequently stabilizes further during the second week. With circadian rhythms aligning more closely to light exposure and food timing, melatonin secretion synchronizes more consistently. Cortisol peaks in the morning may become sharper and more appropriate. The nervous system operates with clearer boundaries between activation and rest. This oscillation mirrors evolutionary design, activity and light, repair and darkness. By day 12 or 13, the experience shifts psychologically. Hunger loses its emotional intensity. It becomes informational rather than urgent. This distinction is profound. Much of modern metabolic dysfunction stems from constant stimulation, food as entertainment, reward, or distraction. Narrowing the feeding window restructures this relationship. Appetite becomes cyclical instead of compulsive. At the cellular level, sirtuin activity may be modestly stimulated. Sirtuins are enzymes involved in DNA repair and metabolic regulation. They respond to energy availability and stress signals. While extreme claims around longevity are often overstated, the biochemical pathways influenced by structured fasting overlap with those studied in aging research. The relevance is not immortality. It is improved maintenance. By the 14th day, the system reflects coherence across multiple levels: hormonal, metabolic, neural, and digestive. Insulin remains lower during extended periods. Fat oxidation is efficient. Sleep is aligned. Inflammation is moderated. Appetite signaling is regulated. This does not mean perfection. It means rhythm. But this is not meant to become chronic deprivation. The purpose of a 1-4-day structured dinner omission is informational. It reveals how the body responds when given metabolic space. Long-term sustainability depends on periodic flexibility. Feeding and fasting are not opposites, they are complementary signals. The deeper lesson is not that dinner is harmful, it is that constant input without pause blunts adaptive systems. When we remove a single habitual meal, the body does not weaken, it reorganizes, it repairs, it recalibrates. 2 weeks is enough time to observe biological intelligence at work, not dramatic, not extreme, quiet, coordinated, and measurable. The transformation is less about weight and more about restored oscillation. Human physiology was never designed for perpetual feeding. It was designed for cycles. And cycles, when respected, create resilience. 14 days, 14 missed dinners. On the surface, that sounds minor. In reality, it represents a structured interruption in one of the most constant stimuli in modern life, continuous feeding. What you have just witnessed is not a diet trick. It is physiology responding to space. When dinner disappears, insulin falls. When insulin falls, stored energy becomes accessible. When energy becomes accessible, metabolic flexibility returns. Over 2 weeks, that shift ripples outward into mitochondrial efficiency, into inflammatory tone, into sleep architecture, into appetite regulation, and into cellular maintenance pathways like autophagy. None of these changes are magical. All of them are measurable. But here is the critical distinction. Skipping dinner is not inherently powerful. The power lies in oscillation. Human biology was designed for cycles fed and fasted, active and resting, light and dark. Modern life compresses those cycles into a constant on state, constant input, constant stimulation, constant insulin. When you remove a single habitual meal, you are not starving the system. You are restoring contrast. Contrast creates sensitivity. Sensitivity restores control. By the end of 14 days, the body does not feel deprived, it feels organized. Hunger becomes rhythmic instead of reactive. Energy becomes steady instead of volatile. Sleep aligns more naturally with circadian timing. Fat becomes fuel instead of storage. Inflammation moderates. Hormones coordinate instead of collide. Yet balance remains essential. Skipping dinner does not eliminate the need for adequate protein, micronutrients, hydration, and total caloric sufficiency. This experiment works when the feeding window remains nutritionally complete. It fails when restriction replaces rhythm. Biology rewards precision, not extremism. The real outcome of these 2 weeks is awareness. You have seen how quickly the body recalibrates when given space. You have seen that hunger is not always emergency, it is often adaptation. You have seen that metabolism is not fragile, it is dynamic. This is not a command to remove dinner forever. It is an invitation to question automatic patterns. To test whether your body performs better with structure rather than constant input. To understand that health is not built through intensity alone, but through timing. Because the human body does not need constant feeding to survive. It needs cycles to thrive. If this exploration shifted how you see your own biology, stay with us. Real-life body science exists to examine what actually happens beneath the surface, without hype, without extremes, and without shortcuts. Your body is not a mystery, it is a system. And when you understand the system, you regain agency. The question now is simple. What rhythm will you choose?